say yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We have got to say yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes, I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Of course, in the excitement of getting that started, I forgot to take us live on YouTube, and I forgot to press the record button as well, which I'm doing right now. Record.
And there's no film in the camera.
I just have to get a radio announcer to help us do all these little things. Everybody's doing well, and hope that maybe you might be doing a little bit better after coming to church this morning. Holy Jesus, you've come to church. I've been starting our virtual events here with these words from Clarence Skinner, who was our founder, 1920. We are 100 years old, folks, in this year, and our festivities have been somewhat postponed, not canceled. And among the things that we've been doing is a lot of looking at our archives. And this is an invocation that Clarence Skinner wrote that they would say at the beginning of church. Out of the world's wide ways we come to this, our house of fellowship and aspiration. Here may the evils which beset us be banished by the power of justice. The fears that haunt us be overcome by fresh insight. The doubts that drive us be dissolved into finer faith. Here, each in our own way, yet together, let us for a brief time look into the mysteries of life's beginning, the source out of which the endless eons roll and countless lives emerge, and with renewed hope, search through this maddening maze of things to find again life's aims and meaning, and above all, its glory. I love that. It's just beautiful. Clarence Skinner was a Universalist minister. He was the dean also of Tufts University School of Theology. And they started this experiment in 1920 of a new meaning of religion to encompass a greater thing and to take on a social role. And here we are 100 years later, and we're a whole different thing, but hopefully not clinging, but embracing those same values. And there's a lot to tell, and we're going to be telling it as widely as we can during this, our 100th anniversary. Welcome to all of you. I want to start with a couple of sad notes. I haven't heard a lot of details about these two, but Jose Soler, who has been our presenter and speaker, I saw in some of the May Day car rallies and signs that say Jose Soler vive. So I'm assuming that he has recently passed. He is a Puerto Rican exponent of Puerto Rican independence. And we mourn his passing because he was a very eloquent and wonderful man, and he would bring his coterie of independentistas to the programs that he presented at community church. Jose Soler presente is what we say. The other one is someone I believe, Judith, you might know about. His name is Livio Paez. Livio was a Venezuelan who sang a few times. He was a musician. He played the cuatro, you know, that beautiful rhythmic thing in the Venezuelan cuatro. He lived in Chelsea, and he was deported. And this was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and he was back in Venezuela, and we had word on a Venezuela activism chat room on WhatsApp that I'm on that he had passed. Livio Paez, presente. Now, an amazing piece of great news. Arnie King. Arnie King is someone who's been in prison for 45 years for committing a drug-related teenage crime when he was a very young man, and he turned into an just exemplary advocate for young people and teenagers, and he is free. Arnie King is free.
Hooray,
we have
hooray.
advocated for Arnie for many years. His brother Kazi Turi came and spoke on Arnie's behalf. His advocate Diane Zimbabwe also spoke. We wrote letters. Arnie has got to be the only person who was unanimously recommended by the parole board, which is an almost impossible hurdle to traverse, to be commuted, for a sentence to be commuted. The parole, this was years ago, the parole board had recommended his freedom. There was no governor who would say, I commute your sentence. Why? Because this string of governors had presidential aspirations. And there's this guy named Willie Horton. You remember what he did to Dukakis's campaign. And that was a reason governors would not do it. Arnie King is free on a medical discharge, which is a wonderful thing. There has not been a general discharge, but Arnie King, after 45 years inside, is out with his family and his brother, his wife of many years. I will tell you that I saw Arnie in the visiting room in the prison with his wife back in December. I was visiting Lee Underwood, who's one of our other members behind bars. And I went over to say hi to Arnie just for a moment, and the prison guard on duty immediately yelled, "No cross visits, get back to where you were." It was a disgusting thing, but it doesn't matter now. For a moment, we're gonna revel in the freedom of Arnie King, and we can hardly wait, Arnie, to have you with us at Community Church, addressing us and telling us about your experience and speaking about prison abolition and prison reform in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in this entire country. Arnie King está con nosotros. It's a marvelous thing. It's a marvelous thing. Okay, a week from today, we were supposed to have our wonderful biannual world music event that's called Playing for the Planet. Warren Senders and I have produced this for several years now. It's a conglomeration of different performers. We canceled the live event, but I just saw that Warren has not only come back with a virtual event, but it's a virtual event on steroids. Instead of just 3 performers or acts, he has like 6 or 7 of them all in a row, playing for the planet. And it's the theme is world music from all over the planet. And they're always wonderful events, and this one promises to be as beautiful an event. It's all a benefit for 350.org and their Massachusetts 350mass.org. Which is also called Better Future Project. It's a benefit for them. And that's on May 9th in the evening. So I hope you will join us. There will be information on our website and our Facebook page about that world music event a week from today. I'm sorry, a week from yesterday, Saturday evening, May 9th. Today is Pete Seeger's birthday. Happy birthday, Pete. You're presente, so we just want to send that out to you. And we think of a beautiful memory 1 year ago was Saturday, May 3rd, and we hosted a marvelous event. It was packed to the gills. 115 people were there, with a bunch of performers who played Pete's songs. And we raised a bunch of money for the Highlander Center, which had just been firebombed by a white supremacist group, and their administration building burnt down. They are on their way back. And that was another really triumphant moment at Community Church. I want to also just share a little bit of news. We just heard from World Fellowship Center, which long time has been our sort of sister summer camp up in the White Mountains. Some of us call it commie camp. I used to go up there pretty often and sing. They just announced that they're not having a season this summer, and that's a really sad thing. Lots of us love to go up there, either to present or to just enjoy that beautiful place, but they're not having a season because of the same reason you know about already. Finally, and then we get some more music from Matt and Yvonne. We could become a clearinghouse for all kinds of activist initiatives that there are, but I want to mention two places that are much more effective clearinghouses than we are. One is called Surge Boston. You spell it S-U-R-J. Boston, and they are a project of Community Change International, Community Change Incorporated, which has for a long time advocated on behalf of anti-racism in the city of Boston. Surge Boston, if you find that online, S-U-R-J, I'm sorry, Surge Boston, they have a big list of things that we can do both as activists and as contributors to help undocumented people, people behind bars, people who are in a real tough time because of this pandemic and because of this other pandemic, which is called capitalism, and which is called the United States government under this president. I haven't gotten my incentive check. I don't know if it's even coming, but when it is, I'm going to go on Surge Boston. They have a lot of ideas about where you can contribute and give back your check to people who need it much more than at least I do. I don't know about you all, but Matt and Yvonne, I'm just so glad that you are with us this morning from Switzerland. It's about 6:30 p.m. there, and I just have such great memories of your presence with us. I'm especially reminded of the James Connolly presentation that you did, which was accompanied by a book and CD, which I'm sure is available online somewhere. And those labor songs that are still engraved in my mind. Will you do a couple of songs for us?
Yes.
Matt Callahan and Yvonne Moore.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the
James Connolly. Wait.
Am I there? Should we? Hello?
Charlie, can you unmute?
Yes, I can, and they're unmuted as far as I can.
For us.
They're a little bit low.
A little low, but we'll get louder as we start singing. These are we're going to do two songs from the James Connolly Songs of Freedom program. This one, both of which I think you'll find appropriate for May Day. This song is actually called "Be Moderate," but its subtitle is "We Only Want the Earth."
Some man faint-hearted ever seek a program to retouch, and will insist whene'er they speak that we demand too much. 'Tis passing strange that I declare, such statements cause me mirth. For our demands most modest are, we only want the earth. Be moderate, the timorous cry, who dread the tyrant's thunder. You ask too much, and people fly from you aghast in wonder. 'Tis passing strange, and I declare, such statement cause me mirth. For our demands most moderate are, we only want the earth. Our masters, all a godly crew, whose hearts throb for the poor. Their sympathies assure us too, if our demands were fewer. Most generous souls, but please observe, what they enjoy from birth is all we ever had the nerve to ask, that is the earth. The labor faker, full of guile, such doctrine ever preaches. And whilst he bleeds the rank and file, tame moderation teaches. Yet in his despite, we'll see the day when with sword in its girth, labor shall march in war array to seize its own, the earth. For labor long with groans and tears to its oppressors knelt, but never yet to aught save fears did hear of tyrant melt. We need not kneel, our cause is high, of true men there's no dearth, and our victorious rallying cry shall be, we want the earth. Yes, our victorious rallying cry shall be, we want the earth. Thank you.
And the next song is well known to all, I'm sure, in this audience. It was actually written, the last song was written by James Connolly. This song was actually written by Jim Connell, another Irish revolutionary, and is still sung the world over. It's called The Red Flag.
Yeah. The people's flag is steepest red. It's shrouded off a martyr dead, and ere their limbs grew stiff and cold, their hearts' blood dyed its every fold. That raised the scarlet standard high, within its shade we live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we will keep the red flag flying here, oh yeah. It waved above our infant might when all I had seemed darkest night. It witnessed many a deed and vow. We must not change its color now, and raise the scarlet standard high. Within its shade we live and die. Oh, traitors sneer, we will keep the red flag flying here. Oh yeah. Yes, we will. It well recalls the triumphs past. It gives the hope of peace at last. The banner bright, the symbol plain of human right and human gain. And raise the scarlet standard high. Within its shade we live and die. Oh, cowards sneer and traitors flinch. We keep the red flag flying here. Oh yeah. It suits today the weak and base, whose minds are fixed on pelf and place, to cringe before the rich man's frown and haul the sacred emblem down and raise the scarlet standard high. Within its shade we live and die. Oh, cowards flinch and traitors sneer. We will keep the red flag flying here. Oh yeah. Yes, we will. Oh yeah, we will keep that red flag flying. Oh, we keep that red flag flying here. Yes, we will. Oh, yes, we will. Yes, we keep that red flag. Yeah, take it home. And raise the scarlet standard high. Within its shade we live and die. Oh, cowards flinch and traitors sneer. We will keep the red flag flying here. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yes we will. Yes we keep that red flag flying. Yeah. Keep that red flag flying here.
All right, Matt and Yvonne. Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Oh yes.
oh yeah. We all
Thank
say
you.
we can hardly wait till you're with us live in the flesh, but this is a good substitute. It just like comes through. Folks, just a couple more words before we bring Judith on. I have a, it might be backwards. Our latest newsletter is a shortened version. It should have come to you either by email or in paper by the US Postal Service. But it has a listing of all our events. It's shortened because our printer has been closed. And we did this in the office. It's just on a letter size, both sides. On the other side is a little newsletter that if you have not received it, be in touch with us either by phone or email, and we will make sure you get a copy of it. It's just a little synopsis about our circumstance, which is an amazing one in the sense that we own a building in Copley Square, but it's also in the short term a very difficult one in the sense that we depend on the income from the first floor restaurant, which is closed, and obviously is either not paying rent or paying rent some later date down the road. But that leaves us in a terrible circumstance, and this letter tells you all about it. Let's see, I want to also welcome Sandra Harris, who's watching us on YouTube, and she made a correction. the musician from Venezuela is named Livio Arias, not Livio Paez. I looked him up in our records, and that's how we had it. Maybe we got it wrong, or he was using that name, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Livio Arias presente. I'm ready to listen to Judith and see some of the beautiful images that Judith has collected for this presentation. Judith and David are longtime members of Community Church, going back into the early 80s, maybe even the late 70s. And they have stepped up like in such a beautiful way to be on our present board of directors, are in just a major leadership role at the church right now. Enough for me to say about Judith Woodruff, who's going to talk to us about the red and green of May Day. Judith.
Okay, thank you. Glad to see many people here today who I know. I got interested in May Day because I participated in it as a child. I remember going to May Day marches in Union Square and preparing for them, working on posters that celebrated our parents' work, learning dances, learning songs, and celebrating it. It became very repressive during the McCarthy era. At that time, there were people who were encouraged to drop sandbags from roofs on marchers. Horses of the police began to come into the crowd and disrupt it. And it was used as an excuse to cancel the May Day parades, which were canceled in the heart of McCarthy times in 1953. So that was part of my growing up history. I'm now going to talk about the red and green of May Day, because May Day goes back a very long time. It probably goes, we should look at the sense that it's rooted in agriculture, the worship of the tree of life. And the tree of life is something you find in all religions. You find it in our Bible, the Garden of Eden. You find it in the Bowie tree of the Buddhists, and the idea of the tree of life that forms all creation is part of probably all religions. But the first written history that we get is from the Romans, who celebrated May Day, or the period between the end of April and the first few days of May, as the occasion for the festival of Flora. And that took place about 2,000 or more years ago. And they basically she was the Roman goddess of fertility, of flowers. And that began with the idea of her protecting people's crops. It was very important to have their crops protected, the flowers, gardens, the fruits. And one of the ways they did it was they held dances, they held circuses even, they held theater. It was a big occasion for the celebration of people through the arts, and it lasted 5 days, which, by the way, was the way May Day was celebrated for hundreds of years, thousands of years. It was a holiday of 5 days, which, as the Industrial Revolution became under attack as a waste of time. And it was one of the reasons that it was actually opposed. So we know that the Greeks had sacred groves, the Druids worshipped oak trees, the Scotch made circles around trees, and then there was also the Gaelic Beltane. And the Celts believed that the sun was being kidnapped for a large part of the year, and then they celebrated its return in spring. They lit bonfires, and people would walk around the fire. They even leaped over the fire. And then in Germany, there was Walpurgis Night. And the idea was to ward off evil forces at the night, and then to celebrate by hanging up foliage that you got from going into the forests. Now, one of the things that people did was they went into the forest, what they called a Maying, going a Maying. And they would bring back boughs and blossoms and decorate their homes with it. And I have to say that at that point, that many babies were being born from people going a Maying, so that it became very popular for people to get married in June. And that's one of the reasons that June became associated with a wedding month. Anyway, there were a lot of rituals, and they would be, instead of Flora, the Queen of the May and her escort, Jack of the Green. Nobody knows exactly how the maypole became a symbol of May Day, but it was probably tied to the idea of the trees, because there had been tree worship, and people would vie to get the largest or tallest tree that they could, and they would dye some of the ribbons or get the ribbons, and they would go one way, and then they would intertwine and go another way. The festivals were very much loved, and despite people trying to close it down because it was taking people out of the workforce or the farming force for 5 days, it persisted even through the Middle Ages. And every village had a maypole, and there were plays and performances. And there was even a contest for the May Queen that was very popular. Now in America, this kind of thing never had very much popularity because the Puritans made sure to kill it and squash it in an event that I'm going to tell you about next. But nonetheless, in England, it evolved into Robin Hood and Maid Marian instead of Maya. Maya had been the Roman god of the whole universe. She created Zeus. She was the mother of Zeus. So May had sort of symbolized that fertility and creation. But Robin Hood and Maid Marian also were a protest against the enclosure laws. At the time, more and more people were taking peasant land, which had been on the common. It had been okay to be able to hunt, to be able to fish, to be able to take the fruits of the land in common areas. And the common kept being enclosed more and more by the kings and by the lords and by nobles. And Robin Hood, who supposedly took from the rich and gave to the poor, was a symbol of the fight against the Enclosure Acts. But it was sort of disguised because there was a lot of repression. And so basically, again, the May Day feast would also feature fun things like the Lord of Misrule, or the Abbot of Disobedience, or the King of Unreason. And it was a time for people to, as I said, make merry, which very alarmed bosses, because it was very hard to get people to go back to work on the 5th day. Many cases, people had a hard time putting away being married together. Now, this struggle was brought to Massachusetts, here in Quincy, right near Boston, by Thomas Morton, who came over in around 1620. And he got very involved. The Puritans had come over in 1619. And they had objected very much to the idea of this holiday. They felt it was too sexual, that this idea of going a-maying was unfortunate, that it was hard to get people back to work, which they considered the most important virtue. And Thomas Morton settled in Quincy, which he called Marymount. And he was the kind of person who really liked Native Americans. He felt, in fact, he had a woman consort, and he began to live with Native Americans, and that wasn't that unusual. Many of the people who sailed to America had come out of jails. It was a very dangerous trip. And in order to fill out some of the crew, they were given the idea that they could have a reprieve from jail if they came on board the ships. So there were people who came here when they saw Native Americans with this open land and sharing. They were very attracted to it. And in fact, some of them became actual chiefs. Billy Bigelow became a chief of a Native tribe because he had many things to teach them, and they respected him. He respected them. So Morton wasn't alone. In fact, the first laws of miscegenation were not between white and black in this country. They were between Native Americans and white people, because the fear was that there was just too much mixing. Anyway, Thomas Morton was friends with servants. He was friends with slaves. He encouraged runaway slaves to come to his farm. And he, one day in about 1627, he took a very, very tall oak tree, and he topped it with a deer skull. That was the contribution of the natives. They put deer skulls on it, and they had ribbons, and they were dancing. Some of the women, it was a very warm day, and some of the women were dancing bare-breasted, which was not unusual for some of the women. And he wrote a poem, Thomas Morton, to it, and he put it on top of the maypole, and it concluded, "With this proclamation, the 1st of May at Merrymount, it shall be kept as a holy day." So he was making merry when who should have come but Governor Bradford and Miles Standish. And they were extremely angry and said he was violating the king's laws, and they cut down the maypole right in front of him, and they took all his goods and put him in jail, and then shipped him back to England, where he also was put in jail. And he tried to return to America once and was again sent back to England. Morton was a threat, of course, to the Puritans because he believed in an equalitarian society. He believed and befriended Native Americans who they were killing. You can read about this if you're interested. There's a story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and it's actually called Merrymount. And Hawthorne felt that this particular incident shaped a great deal of the history of our country. He felt that it was a question of happiness and fertility and joy versus gloom, and the idea of strict saints versus gay sinners, sort of green versus iron. And the Puritans unfortunately won out, and their America became an Indian-hating country, psalm singing, and who saw the made a whipping pole out of the maypole. That's what they did with it. They put it as a place where the people could be whipped. The whole idea of banning the maypole and May Day was to establish work discipline, because obviously it was too much for people to be, when they were happy, they just had a hard time going back to the rigors, which were quite a bit. They were 10 and 12-hour days, sometimes more. You can see this. Isaac Newton, for example, in 1717, declared that work was the main reason for the planet and the universe. And then he bought, to make his point, he bought a 100-foot maypole from London, and he used it to prop up his telescope on, and said that was the major good use for a maypole. But however, May Day persisted as a day to do important things in England. And it was the day in 1807 that they used, excuse me, I'm gonna have to take some water, that they used to declare the end of slavery. So the end of slavery by the English was declared in 1807 on May Day. Now, years later, around 1819, in the colony of Jamaica, there was a man named William Davidson, and his mother was Black and his father was English. And his father was somewhat liberal and really loved his son and gave him a proper English education. William Davidson, however, was really a revolutionary, and he decided to come to England. And when he was there, he decided to round up other conspirators and to overthrow the government of England, to put in a more favorable government toward the oppressed colonies. And unfortunately, a government spy, somehow the word got out, and the government sent in one of the people that Davidson thought was going to be part of his crew, was actually a spy for the king. And when they went in on the plot, it was called the Cato Street plot. The government high officials were having dinner on Cato Street, and the idea was to go in at the dinner, surprise them, and kill the top offenders and replace them with an attempt to put in a people's government. But they were betrayed, and they chose the date of the people's holiday, May 1st, to execute them. And they were hung on May 1st. It was 1820, a year later. Robert Owen, who some of you may have heard of or know as the socialist, for one of the first people to do socialistic writings, beside the poet Shelley. But he was a founder of utopian communities, some of which were in the United States, called New Lanark. He declared that people should celebrate May Day from now on in respect to the uprising that I just told you about. And from that date on, it was official that May Day would become a holiday for celebration and resistance. It was also the year, by the way, that Mother Jones was born. She was born in 1830, lived 100 years. And she was the founder, one of the founders of the Knights of Labor. She worked with the United Mine Workers of America, and she helped to found the Wobblies. So that was a auspicious year. So I want to come to the red part of the story. That was where the green part is. Thousands of immigrants were pouring into Chicago. In fact, 76% of Chicago was immigrant at the time of the Haymarket incident, which was in 1886. And in fact, in the defendants of the Haymarket, there were 8 defendants of the Haymarket trial, and only one of them was born in America. The other was born in England, and all the rest were born in Germany. A lot of Germans came after the Revolution of 1848, and certainly after the Civil War. Well, there were many strikes and violence all during these times in Chicago and in other places, but I'm going to just highlight 1 or 2. In Chicago, police were using guns against workers who were protesting beer gardens. They tried to close the beer gardens because they felt it led to too much lack of worker discipline, that people were hungover and didn't show up well on Mondays. So they attempted to close down the beer gardens. And there was a great riot and people were killed, workers were killed. That was in 1855. And then there was another riot about bread. There were a whole bunch of hungry people that had gathered under a tunnel where they had some homeless people were living, and they were demanding bread. And they were instead shot, and it caused a big demonstration in response to the killing of innocent people who only wanted bread. And lastly, I'm going to highlight the railway strike of 1877, where federal troops had to be brought in, and that to suppress workers. And it was called the Battle of the Viaduct, and again, workers were killed. But the strike that really formed May Day, as you probably know, was the big strike, the Haymarket affair that was run through the McCormick Reaper factory. And it took place, the people who worked at that factory were called the Molders Union, Local 623. That was in 1867. There was a big to-do. So now we're going to progress to 1886, which is the date of the Haymarket. At this time, right before the incident, McCormick, who made 71% profit on his work, decided that it wasn't enough and that he should cut wages by 15%. So there was a beginning of a strike, and there were 4 leaders who decided that they were going to go out on strike, and they called for the 8-hour day. Well, that was the demand, the 8-hour day. The actual work day was 10 or 11 hours. And they were locked out by the police, and then that wasn't enough. When they continued to try to protest, they were shot dead. So there were between 2 workers shot dead and 2 who was in critical condition. So the following night, which was May 4th, this had what I just told you, happened on May 3rd. But on May 4th, the leaders, Albert Parsons and August Spies and many of the other labor leaders, called for a demonstration to protest the killing of these innocent workers. And about 3,000 people showed up. It was a rainy day. And they came to Haymarket Square, which was one of the areas that people often protested. And now something interesting happened. There were leaflets that were found that called for revenge. They called that workers should take weapons and arm themselves against people. And the rhetoric was very revolutionary and very provocative. And it was considered possibly that these leaflets were put out by the Pinkertons to create a riot. They were disowned by the actual workers. So it was one of the cases which people have come up against where there were plants to cause problems. The crowd was addressed by August Spies and also Albert Parsons and a man named Samuel Fielden. And everything was very fiery, but basically the speakers, knowing that there could be provocation, asked everyone to stay calm, and they did. The mayor of Chicago was there, and he looked at the crowd. He thought it was very peaceful, and eventually he just got up and walked away because he thought everything was under control. Well, it started to rain pretty much. It wasn't very heavy, but it was a definite drizzle, and most of the crowd went home. And out of the 3,000 people, only 200 were left. And Samuel Feldman was talking to them. And at that moment, just as he was talking, 180 policemen suddenly charged the crowd for no reason. I mean, most people had gone home. It was a quiet talk, but they still charged the crowd. And as they did, they said, Feldman, you step down. And he went to step down. And just at the moment that he went to step down, a bomb was thrown. Anyway, when the bomb went off, the police that were there went after the demonstrators, and a large number of police were actually wounded by each other because they were firing so indiscriminately. It was hard to see, there was smoke, and one policeman was immediately killed, and 6 others were wounded, basically by police bullets, by the way. And so altogether, 7 policemen died, and 60 policemen were wounded, and 70 workers were badly wounded, and more workers were killed. Another 2 to 3 workers were killed. The people who were in this crowd were not even armed. There were 1 or 2 people who might have had guns, but that violence was actually caused by the police themselves. However, that didn't stop there from being a very harsh clampdown on the union, and people were being agitated against the unionists by the newspapers. And especially Germans, since the speakers were German, came under a lot of suspicion. And there were a lot of people who were anarchists and immigrants that were not even hardly related to the affair that were rounded up and questioned, in some cases imprisoned unfairly. However, the emphasis was on the speakers, and the police declared that their anarchists were responsible for the riot. It was all their fault. Many people believe that actually it was the Pinkertons that were responsible because they were secretly infiltrating groups, and it may have been they who used these violent means to break up strikes that were responsible. And that evidence against Pinkertons wasn't even brought to the trial. So the police rounded up 8 defendants, most of whom were not present at the bombing. That's important to know that they were not even present there. And 1 or 2, only 2 had spoken before the provocation and had gone home. Anyway, the trial began very shortly afterward. This had taken place on May 4th. On June 21st, they had already assembled a trial, interviewed the jury. They went through the jury, they interviewed 1,000 people in the jury, and they wound up getting a jury that was totally biased against workers. That's what they wanted. And they had a judge that was biased against workers. And the jury actually confessed that they were anti-strikers, but they were still put on the jury. And it was hard to prove originally because the defendants had actually nothing to do with the bombing. They weren't present for the bombing. So the case became that even though the thrower was anonymous, they didn't know who did it. They were all co-conspirators because they agitated and aroused the crowd, even though many people felt that there was more evidence to show that the Pinkertons were involved in the bombing. So the jury, unsurprisingly, returned a guilty verdict for all the defendants and sentenced all but one of them, a man named Nesby. They gave 15 years because he was very peripheral to the case. And the rest, they said, were going to have to be hung. And they had appeals, but they turned them down. And one of the defendants, Ling, just committed suicide. He apparently, through a friend, had gotten some kind of pellet that he could use, and he killed himself before he could be hung. 2 of the 7 who have been sentenced to death, they allowed to have life imprisonment, but the rest were going to be hung. So the next day after the final appeal was finished, which was November 11th, Armistice Day, which wasn't Armistice Day then though. November 11th, 1887, a year later, the 4 defendants, Engel, Spies, Parsons, and Fisher, were taken to the gallows. And Spies shouted became a famous saying, the time will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you are strangling today. I also read, which was very unfortunate, that they suffered, they did not kill them immediately. They didn't hang them properly. I don't know whether it was on purpose, but they did suffer a pretty awful death right after the hanging. Many people had protested this hanging. William Dean Howells, Clarence Darrow, George Bernard Shaw, William Morris, many famous people and many unionists went out and condemned this. And in fact, it helped get the election of a new governor, John Peter Atgeld. And one of the things he campaigned on is that he was a German immigrant himself, and he said that he was going to look into the real justice of the case. And when he came to be the governor, he pardoned all those who still remained alive and said they were victims of hysteria, of a packed jury, of a biased judge, of an overwrought press. And he condemned the city of Chicago for not holding the guards, the Pinkerton guards, responsible for some of the lethal weapons that they used against strikers. Even though he was popular, a very strong opposition was raised to his re-election, and unfortunately he was defeated. But rather than trying to diminish the agitation for the 8-hour day, which bosses thought that this repression would do, it actually increased it. And they kept big popular pressure and very much militancy building for the 8-hour day. It was decided, the AFL and Samuel Gompers was quite militant. Later, they were not as militant, but at this time they were very militant. They had just formed. And they decided that they would use May 1st, on May 1st, 1890 as the date that workers would strike for an 8-hour day. But they didn't want it to be just America. And there was a international going on. There had been the first international started by Karl Marx, and there was a second international. And he actually sent a delegate to the second international in Paris and asked them, could you advocate for a universal May Day for workers? And that's one of how it started, by the way. And May 1st, 1890 was the first, in a sense, world demonstration worldwide, with the purpose of that demonstration was to honor the Haymarket martyrs and all the workers that were killed in conjunction with the various strikes that I had mentioned. There was a lot of workers killed by strikes. So the first International Workers' Day was a huge success. There was, it had to be covered on the front and covered the front page of the New York Times. And there were 250,000 workers that showed up in New York. I mean, that's a lot. And in 24 cities of Europe, it was celebrated, and also in 3 countries, Cuba, the Philippines, and Peru. Oh, I forgot, and Chile. I'm sorry, one more, Chile. And so after this commemoration on 1890, May 1st, they said, May 1st should be forever the workers' holiday. And that's when it became that standardized as the workers' holiday and not just a festival that I had described to you. So the significance of having simultaneous demonstrations worldwide gave a lot of impetus to the movement. And more people began to participate in it. And some of the language became more revolutionary. It wasn't just for the 8-hour day. They started causing for the overthrow of the capitalist system. They started asking for the end of class distinctions. They actually caused for social revolution. However, in order to make it more popular and less frightening, they used the word, they asked to take the word out from the declarations of social revolution and make social change. So it was adopted that the holiday would call for social change. But it represented the will of the power of workers to try to change the existing system in addition to the 8-hour demand. So that was the first time that not just the 8 hours, but the whole call for a change in the system for workers happened. And the influence of Haymarket affected many people. Emma Goldman, who wasn't, of course, a participant then, she was not around, but as she grew up, she said the events of that day of Haymarket and of the martyrs was the most decisive influence on her life and radicalized her. And she wasn't alone. Many people became radicalized by it. Now, martyrs, the Haymarket martyrs, Ling, Spies, Parson, and Engels, who had all died, were buried in a place called the Waldheim Cemetery in Illinois, not too far from Chicago. And then the others who had been imprisoned and freed by the governor were also buried there when they died. And Emma Goldman said she wanted to be buried there, and she was. And many revolutionaries asked to be buried in that particular cemetery. And that they built a large monument. It was we can look it up under Waldheim Cemetery in Haymarket. It's a very big and beautiful statue of a woman holding her hand up, and at her feet is a fallen striker. And that was put on, and by the way, after many struggles, on the 100th anniversary of Haymarket, the National Historic Landmarks and the US Department of Interior declared it a national monument. So that monument is now a national monument. Now the police were very concerned that they didn't have a monument. So in 1889, they built a monument to the policemen. And it stayed okay, it was in Haymarket Square. But if you recall the kind of activities and protests at the Chicago Democratic Party in 1960, the convention in 1968, then it was following the anniversary of the Haymarket affair. There was a big confrontation of demonstrators and police and an anti-Vietnam War rally that was taking place by the police statue, and the police statue was totally vandalized. So the statue was rebuilt in 1970, and it was also vandalized. So they kept putting it out, and it kept getting vandalized. So eventually, now it's in the Chicago Police Headquarters, where everybody can get to it. Nobody can see it, but it's safe. And there was an attempt to build a labor memorial and in a labor park in Chicago in honor of the Haymarket martyrs, but that never happened. It only started, and it's something that people could continue to work on. Well, the Haymarket affair did not dampen the struggle for the 8-hour day. In 1904, there was an international conference in Amsterdam, and they said that they would like to ask the world that it become mandatory of all workers' organizations to please stop work and not work on May Day. And from then on, actually from 1904, that May Day became a holiday where workers refused to work, where they said it was their holiday. I'm going to skip over because we can't go over all the different May Days, but there was a memorable May Day in 1919. And it was a protest because there was the arrest of Eugene V. Debs. And there was a big protest about the fact that he was convicted. And the trial for Debs took place in Cleveland, and the leader of the Socialist Party there wanted to hold a march to protest Debs' conviction. There was big clashes again between the marchers and there were 3 parts of the party that had a lot of hatred. Unfortunately, some workers got killed and 116 people were arrested. The newspapers kept playing up the fact that of the 116, only 8 were American born, that all this problem was being caused by immigrants. And there became a wave of maybe I hope this sounds familiar, anti-immigrant kinds of agitation. Interestingly enough, German war tanks that had been used in World War I were brought in, and they were used against the workers. Can you imagine? These war tanks were suddenly animated and rolled off against, and there were women and children, and 130 workers were sentenced, and many workers were wounded. Many workers were really badly hurt. But at the penitentiary in Fort Leavenworth, the prisoners heard about the demonstrations and wanted to be part of them. And so they refused to do any work, and the guards couldn't make them do it. And they hung out banners from their windows, some of which they had dyed red. And there was a big parade, and they asked to parade in the yard be solidarity with other workers. So that was something of interest. In the 20s and the 30s, May Day was celebrated by union organizers, by the unemployed, by very determined workers, and various socialists and communists. 1930, Lucy Parsons, who died in 1942, she was the wife of Albert Parsons, and she was part Black, part Hispanic, and part Native American, and who had gone across America constantly talking about the Haymarket rioters. She was put in the head of the May Day parade in 1930, and guess who was alongside her? Studs Terkel was sitting right beside her. And it was a big march. Well, I can't go into all the May Days. I mean, there were so many. But one that I just should mention is in 1968 in Prague. That's where Allen Ginsberg became the Lord of Misrule. And then there was also in London at that year, there was a big protest to stop. There was a law constantly being put, and even to today, against immigration, against third world immigrants. And there was a big, big May Day celebration in London with the main theme of stop discrimination against third world immigrants. And then in Mississippi, about 350 Black students were supporting their friends who had just been arrested in jails for working on integrating counters, etc. So those were holidays that sort of stand out. And also I shouldn't forget in 68 that Columbia University, thousands of students petitioned against armed police on the campus. And also the first Wildcat strike happened in Detroit. And while also in France, you may recall in 68, the general strike. And these all occurred on May Day. In 2006, the character of May Day changed a little bit, the parades. It became much more of a protest by immigrants, along with workers, large numbers of immigrants, and that's true to today, made May Day a parade for immigrant rights. And there were tens and tens of thousands of people in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. And that was even true 2 years ago, 2017, there was a big May Day parade with the whole theme of being against the anti-immigrant policies of the Trump administration. And Trump, as you know, has been proposing continually an anti-immigration bill. And that particular year was a very big focus against it. The attempt to make May Day more, safe, was done by having called May Day Law Day or Loyalty Day or other names in Devatuck. People never resonated to that. So like summing up, what is the red and the green today? Now, some of you may know Leigh Hunt. He was a friend of poet Shelley, and he was a poet and essayist in the 19th century. And he wrote, May Day is the union of the two best things on earth, a love of nature and a love of each other. But the thing is that unions are not able to achieve what their goals without some kind of struggle. And there seems to be no gain without pain, and no birth without labor, right? No dreams without responsibility to try to make them happen. And so the struggle to save our planet, to save the oceans, to save the water, to save our cities, and to save ourselves is going to mean taking on powerful interests that promote, who believe in the unrestricted use of the Earth's resources as private property. That's happening right now in Brazil. As you know, they're chopping down large parts of the Amazon. And we have a lot of work to do to try to restore our planet and restore our rights. We have to strengthen the green traditions of May Day by taking our power back to restore ecological balance. And we can't just submit to the relentless drive and competition that's been devouring our planet. So I think that even the green people are going to have to embrace the red of May Day, and they're going to have to encourage and not fight against the immigrant communities, work with them and protest against racism, against economic exploitation, and work on the constant struggle to improve our lives, educate our children, find meaningful work that's helpful to communities, and struggle against the aggressive and very short-sighted policies of this country and especially against the re-election of Trump. And you have to remember that the last century's major advances from labor to civil rights to environmental protection don't owe so much to politicians. What do they owe it to? They owe it to Earth Day, to the movement of people, and not politicians that put these social issues on the map by willing to stand up and stand out and march together through insistent, sometimes disruptive demonstrations, but always with a mind to make this planet and this world better. So on this May Day, I think it would be good to close, wish everybody solidarity all over the world forever and worldwide. And I would like to ask that we could sing the Internationale. And after we do that, we used to have a People's Festival at Wake Up the Earth in Jamaica Plain. And I was in charge of that project in which we made murals. Children made murals, neighborhood people made murals. And I was able to get a grant from the Haymarket Foundation and from Resist, progressive organizations, to get professional artists to make posters all celebrating the May Day story. And I brought them to Dean, and he was going to show them to you, the artwork, which I think you'll see ranges from children's and non-professional work to very beautiful work. And the unions paid for it. And many unions, actually, I couldn't show them because many unions insisted on afterward keeping their artwork and only lending it to us for the May Day Wake Up the Earth Festival in Jamaica Plain. So without further ado, I'm going to ask whoever's going to be singing the Internationale to sing it. And please, if you'd like to, join in wherever you are. And also, thank you to my many friends, including Josie in the West Coast, and my neighbor Debbie, and neighbors, and my book club friend Marion, and many others who have come to, and my son Jeremy from Berlin, and my friend Greg. My goodness, that's so wonderful. I haven't seen him for a long time. Hi there, Greg. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful occasion of celebrating our very rich history of the red and green of May Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Arise, ye prisoners of starvation, arise, ye wretched of the earth, for justice thunders condemnation, a better world's in birth. No more traditions chains shall bind us. Arise, ye slaves, no more in thrall. The earth shall rise on new foundations. We have been naught, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict. Let each stand in his place. The international working class shall be the human race. It is the final conflict. Let each stand in his place. The international working class shall be the human race.
I unmuted everybody so we can cheer.
Yay!
Hey.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this
Okay, I
day
think now we're going to see the posters.
and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into
Finally got it off. What's that? I'm talking to the.
Oops. Oh, now we're doing this. You want to talk?
I don't know why he's keeping it there.
Dean, you're muted.
Are the martyrs of the Chicago Haymarket.
Well, there's the
This one is for the, I don't know if they can hear me.
They
This
can.
one, okay, this one is celebrating the Haymarket martyrs. Those are the 4 who were hanged, and that's the people speaking. And as I said, these were done by non-professionals. You'll see the ones that were done by professional artists soon. That's the struggle for the 8-hour day. This is a poem which you can't see by William Morris, and it celebrates the earth and the revolutionary spirit that he feels the earth represents, and the struggle to preserve it. And this one says, May Day was associated with the people's struggle for the earth and for equality, and the social reformer Robert Owens chose the day to be the people's new millennium, and it was for this reason that we celebrate May 1st. It goes back to Robert Owen saying it will become the millennium. The next 1,000 years should be the one that struggles so that workers can own their own work and have a better world. This one is showing the kind of work that people do and the protests and the strikes.
Who did that? Monet? No. The Gleaners.
And this one talks about the mechanization of the farms and the both good that it causes and the bad. As you can see, it was sort of portrayed as a monster. And this one says, but their lives were mechanized, and it talks about what mechanization has done to the idea of work. It's both improved things, but also made work much more anonymous. I think this represents the burning of the native people's villages and some of the terrible struggles that took place. Again, done by, now this one is about Thomas Martin. He came to Massachusetts in 1626, settled in Quincy, and it tells how he created a huge pole and wrapped in ribbons with deer head, and how they danced together and unfortunately were suppressed. I can't read this one, so I think it's probably better to just go on, Dean.
This is
with the
Charlie.
photo of Charlie, I'm sorry. Here is some of the celebrations that people are doing around the trees and around May Day, the early celebrations. And this is supposedly Gaia, the goddess of the earth, trying to protect the earth.
Oh, it's better.
There should be another one.
It should be a lot more.
There should be more because the more professional ones come later. I don't see anything, Dean.
I don't think anybody does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's starting all over again. That's the martyrs. But is there a way to go to the other ones?
Maybe that's all they want to show.
Dean, do you want to show the ones that are done by about the unions? They're very beautiful. I mean, the more professional ones are coming, and we should show them.
Dean, we can't hear you.
I said that the more professional murals that I think people enjoy seeing that were commissioned by the unions are not being shown. Are you planning to?
This is Charlie. I only got a batch of 15. And Dean, did you send another batch?
Yeah.
Okay. It'll take me a couple of seconds to queue those up.
Okay, that's fine. But I think people should see them because they're really excellent work. They were done by a lot of community artists. One of them is David Fichter. The other was Robert Chow, Roberta Chow, Wendy Sen, a number of other people, but there were a lot of wonderful artists who do those murals. And those murals go up every year and wake up the earth. They're hung up as a whole story. There are about 80 of them. and it tells the story of May Day. So I hope any of you who are in Boston can come and walk through that and see them, because that's a heritage of the people. And I'd like you to see the others, because we were able to commission some professional artists to do.
Do you want to take the first question, and then I'll
Okay.
have the rest
Does
of them
anybody
ready?
have any questions? Well, that's amazing. That's wonderful. No questions? Okay.
Well, people may be thinking,
Does anyone have attended a May Day parade or May Day demonstration that would like to share that?
somebody-
Dean, can you supervise the questions while I line the other stuff up?
No, Judith.
Oh, Judith, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you repeat what you said, the red and green? There was a quote you had for the red and green near the end of your talk. What you gave a quote. It was, what I don't remember. I wanted you to repeat it.
Okay, I'm trying to think what that was. Let me look.
Red, you quoted what? A red and the green, that one was like humanity.
Judith, it was Shelley, I think.
No, I
The
just,
Shelley crew.
no, I mentioned, oh, I know, it was Lee Hunt, the friend of Shelley.
Yeah, can you repeat that?
Yeah, okay, I'll try to find it. Okay, here it is, I found it. Okay, he wrote, May Day is the union of the two best things in the world, a love of nature and a love of each other.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So that was very, and I have to say that you might want to look at Shelley's poems. He's very revolutionary, and he's also very beautiful. One of them was like, men of England, men of glory, we're heroes of unwritten story. Shake the chains that like in sleep like dew have fallen on you. Remember, you are many and they are few. And he has some very wonderful. That's from Queen Mab. I recommend reading him.
Okay. Thank you.
Dean, with the
It's Charlie.
Charlie, was that the one?
Yeah, Charlie's doing it.
I did- Dave has something.
Just a second. It's taking me a couple more
I
minutes
think
to
Dave
get
wants
this.
to say something.
No problem.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for the detail about the Haymarket and these other things like Robin Hood. It was very interesting. My question is, do you know whether the story of Haymarket has been used in police training? It seems to me that the police, that young police trainees have a right to know about the other side and be much more aware of the hysteria and things like that.
I don't know the answer, Dave, but I would think most of the wounded came from the police themselves. They couldn't see, they just kept shooting. And I would think that probably would be an instructive lesson, how not to do things.
Yes, exactly.
They
Exactly.
panicked. Basically, they panicked.
Basically,
I
what-
presume that they couldn't see. I mean, it was, and the more they shot and the more they did all that stuff, I'm sure they couldn't see very well.
They also panicked during the 1968 Democratic
Oh,
Convention.
yes, Dave reminds me that the police panicked during the 1968 Democratic Convention, if all of you remember how repressive the
Yeah.
police were. And of course, you know about Kent State and all the other repressions.
Of course, yeah, but so, I'm just wondering whether the police can be trained to understand what's happening and to restrain themselves from that kind of rioting.
I think the answer is that you have to have an administration that doesn't want police to riot.
That's true.
In Turkey and in other countries, police are very repressive, and it's used as a means of combating
Social
popular protest, and as a means of control. So the rioting of police is just endemic to the thing. Okay, if a mother child says, a student, I'm going to the demonstration, everyone says, don't go, you'll get hurt. So part of that is to discourage people from coming to these demonstrations.
Judith,
Yes, Ellen.
hi.
Hi.
I just want you to know of the many lectures and books on the need to bring the climate change issue together with the common people, the working people's issues, that this is one of the most interesting and needed presentations I've heard. And it was so eloquently executed in your way that I'm just hoping you really have a book there, but I'm hoping that this has been recorded. Sometimes they don't get recorded there. And I'm just really hoping that this presentation was recorded. We do have it on Zoom, so I'm sure there's a way to get it transferred. But this was an amazing integration of the development of May Day, and with the early feminist understanding of May Day, with the working people and Workers' May Day. And it's not been done. This is the first time I've heard it. So thank you very much. I'm interested in seeing it in your next book. You need to write a book.
I mean, there was a big movement in California because there was a big protest against lumbering and cutting the trees up in the Northwest. And workers, that was their work. I mean, there was no replacement offered. And so the whole issue of workers' rights versus to make a living versus the environment came to a big head. And there is a movie about that. And there's often that kind of a problem, by the way. So, but hopefully we're going to integrate the red and green. So thank you very much. And last week, Richard had talked on the environment. So I think Community Church is trying to cover a number of aspects of the kind of protest that we need, and information that we need to really work better toward a better environment. So
we need your book. We need your book.
well, anyway,
made a very unique presentation.
Thank you. Are we ready for the rest of the slides?
Just 1 second, I think so.
Does anyone have an experience of being at a May Day parade? Josie,
Oh, here we go.
you might have.
There.
Oh, there we are. If you notice, that's a world she's holding in her hand.
Let's.
World is bleeding.
Mm.
Bleeding.
Oh, yes, that's it.
Yeah.
This was done by a community artist, that picture. What happened to the other picture?
Just a second.
We'll manage, hopefully.
Are we recorded?
Okay,
There
here
we
we
are.
are.
Good.
The SEIU paid for some of these pictures to take place. This one was done by a woman named Ann Cook. An injury to one is an injury to all. Stronger together. You can see that.
Organize, educate.
Okay, can you do the next one?
Can you see?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it. Can you do the next one?
Do you have the one on Sacco and Vanzetti up now?
No.
No.
Okay, yeah.
SCIU.
The picture of Sacco and Vanzetti was done by Paul Norman.
There it is.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay.
Here it
There.
is. And it's hard to read the print. It says Sacco and Vanzetti were Italian immigrants and anarchists. They were, I guess I would need glasses. Maybe you can all see it. Anyway, it tells the history and their words.
I'll read it for you, Judith.
Thank
They
you. I
were
can't read it.
accused of the murder of a shoe factory paymaster and guard and were convicted in 1921 in an atmosphere of anti-radical and racist hysteria. In 1927, they were excluded in Boston despite widespread belief in their innocence and a huge movement protesting the sentence. Never, and here's a quote from Vanzetti, never in our full lives we hope to do such work for tolerance, for justice, for man's understanding of men as now we do by accident. That last something belongs to us. That last moment belongs to us. That agony is our triumph.
Beautiful.
Anyway, that's a beautiful picture by Paul Normandia.
We'll get Paul to let us hang this at Community Church for a while. Paul and Mira are my friends. I never knew that I'd never seen this painting before.
Okay.
Lovely. And the other thing I want to say, Judith, is this could be our first project with somebody who knows how to do some video editing to intersperse your presentation with the images during the presentation.
Okay.
Is next image up or?
No, still Sacco Vanzetti.
How about more of the posters?
Okay.
Still Sacco Vanzetti.
Oh boy, this is.
Zoom has its problems.
I just got a text from Alan Clements who asked me to remind you all of a delegation that Community Church sent to Cuba on May Day in 2001. There were about 10 of us, including Alan, myself, David Olson, Virginia Pratt was with us, and let's see, who else might have been along? A bunch of us, and we were trying to set up a sister parish relationship with some churches in Cardenas, which is 2 hours west of Havana. And we also participated in an enormous May Day march and rally. So there you go, May Day in Cuba. It's an enormous celebration.
This one was what about the killing, the murder of Joe Hill, the hanging of Joe Hill, the labor activist. The person hanging is Joe Hill.
And do we know who painted this one?
No. Again, it's a community person. I would have to look it up.
These are such phenomenal images. Just.
This was done by a non-professional artist in the community.
Really?
A lot of talent there. You have another one? Is Charlie, are you able to?
Oh, next
okay,
one?
just a second. This.
This must be hard to do.
Is there a way it could just sort of flow?
I didn't have it set up properly for that. I'm sorry. So do you see something?
We do, but we saw that already.
Okay.
Can you get to some of the last ones that are done by professional artists?
Okay. Okay.
And we saw that one, thank you.
We just saw.
Actually, can you take another question and I'll have these all lined up?
Okay, that sounds fine. Does anyone have another question or comment? How about a comment? Did anyone ever participate in a May Day parade or a May Day program?
Yes. And the one I will mention to you, if you can all hear me, is the Wake Up the Earth Festival, which is a lovely May Day program, which would have been this weekend if it had not been for the pandemic. And we just send another word of amazing appreciation and solidarity to Femke Rosenbaum and all those people who organize that and so many other incredible community building activities in Jamaica Plain. Wake Up the Earth Festival would have happened this weekend. I would have been there, but it wasn't in the cards, so to speak.
I was able to be in it. This is Dorothy. I was able to be at Judith's Labor Festival May Day event. Right, Judith, the one that these were shown. They were standing
Yes.
on posts sort of things. Anyway, they were very visible and many of them were large. Can you explain how large they were, Judith? Or not?
4 feet by 8 feet.
What kind of,
On
All of these ones we're seeing now.
heavy wood, on heavy wood. Okay,
oh,
are you able to
He's
get
work-
closer to
he's
them?
working on it.
There were 80 of them, so we're only showing you a few of them, but there are some that are just lovely.
All of the same size.
And they're all the same size, and they were, we also had an event. Oh, this is David Gypsy Chain, and he was killed. He was protesting nonviolently in trying to protect the forests in California when there was a lot of, remember I told you there was a struggle with the lumber industry. Workers needed to go to work, and they were very angry at the ecology, at students who were protesting cutting down the trees, and they were cutting down redwoods. And what's her name? Julia Butterfly. Do people remember her?
Butterfly Hill.
Yes, Julia Butterfly Hill. We have a poster of her too, by the way. That poster, as you can see by the one of David, was made by a community person. This is a protest about the meat strikes and the conditions that people work in the meat factories.
And right now we have a problem with them.
Might I add the meat packing stuff going on right now where they're just
That's very relevant.
afflicted with the virus, and they were going to close because it's so horrible. And Trump has ordered that they stay open. It's atrocious.
Right, and this was also done by a person who was not an artist, but is just talented.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, what Trump ordered was that states could not order the closure, okay, but they can close if the company wants that to, or if the union forces the company to close them. They're not required to stay open.
Well, they've certainly been suffering.
Another thing I'll mention is that meatpacking used to be a very prestigious, high-paying unionized work, mostly around Chicago. And then they got hip to the fact that they could reopen those meatpacking plants in remote towns all around the Midwest, North Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, and hire mostly undocumented Central American workers. And that's who is getting hit by this, both the virus and this labor action that's happening right now.
Is it possible to see the next one?
Agreed. By the way, if people are interested in hearing more about the problems at the meatpacking plants, Rachel Maddow has been very good on this on MSNBC. You can look up her shows from this past week.
Do you have the economic justice one on screen now?
No, still the meat packers.
Yeah, it's annoying.
It seems to go back and forth.
Yeah, no,
That's fine, I guess.
Is there, just show one after the other?
It takes.
Okay, this one was done by professional artists. This was done by David Fichter, who does a lot of murals. And it was commissioned by the Jobs for Justice. And it talks about mobilization, and you can see the symbol Jobs for Justice. And down at the bottom, it says living wage and on strike. It's a very lovely poster.
Judith, were any of these ever made into copies so people could buy them?
No, we wanted to. That's something we could think about if we need a grant for it.
Well, or some printer would take the risk that they would sell.
We tried to talk even to the Red Sun Press. Nobody wanted to take the risk.
Oh, I see.
But we could talk about it.
The easy way to do this would be, to take these images and if they're a good enough resolution, print them large and frame them and display them with permission of the artists at community church. You know, we could do
I had suggested that we have a
gallery display.
one is against the World Bank and the WTO and IMF. And it was also a community person that did it, person who's a non-trained artist.
So you've got the economic justice one up now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, on to the,
Oh, I like this one very much. This is Roberto Chow. And I thought this could be a fantastic poster. I read May Day, International Workers' Day, rent control, education, unity, it's in Spanish, no silence, spring, art has no borders, fight racism, make a living, not wage, not war, make love, not war. Anyway, I thought it was beautiful. It's done by Roberto Chow. He comes from Uruguay, an Uruguayan artist.
He's a local, right?
Yes.
Roberto used to live in Jamaica Plain. I think he's retired and moved back to Uruguay, if I'm not mistaken.
He lives in Mexico now.
Mexico, okay, thank you. He used to be at JP Co-Housing.
Right. These are not from our things. These are something else.
Judith, you mentioned the May Day. Yesterday, 30 cars rallied and took a car rally down to the State House and then joined the postal reunion. So some of the people on this program went with me, and
Well, that's very, very important. Thank you, Ellen, because there's a big attempt to close the postal union, and we're going to have to fight back to keep the post office for the people and not, have to be going to FedEx or other people to get our mail. It's going to be a real nightmare. I don't know where this poster came from. It sounds very nice. It's May 1st, 2020, International.
About 2020.
Yes, it's very much.
Charlie, where did this come from?
I thought it was a group you sent me. Go on to the next one.
Well, it's certainly of the moment, so that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
There was to be a car rally this afternoon, actually, at South Bay Prison around the issue of ICE detainees. I don't know a lot about it. I think Charlie might know something. The May Day Coalition is organized.
Yes, it'll be 3 o'clock at the detention center right off of Southampton Street. It's a block off Southampton, right? If you get to, if you're coming down Southampton Street, you take the turn right before you turn onto 93 and go back a block, and that's where the detention center is. And there'll be a safely spaced rally with masks and gloves at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Thank you, Charlie. Are you able to show any more of the paintings?
Okay. You have a new one now? A CIU?
No.
Not yet.
This is annoying. It doesn't change. It changes on my screen, but it doesn't change on this.
Oh, that's a pain.
That's too bad. I do think.
Is the screen that you're sharing? The one that you're showing?
Yeah.
But it does come slowly.
I think actually it wouldn't be a bad idea to put some of those paintings and also solicit other ones. There are other people who are artists. Greg is an artist who might feel inspired. There's more work that could be done, and they could be put out of a compilation of community artists and professional artists on their interpretations of the issues of our time that that are important to struggle for on May Days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
maybe there's some way to see them in the future.
Charlie.
well, they can go on the community church website, can't they, Dean? And you can. They need to be put up so people can.
We can put up a collection of all of these images on the Facebook page and on the website. These are lovely images, and if you have our permission, if we have your permission, Judith, and
I will check. The owner of the posters is Spontaneous Celebrations. the Wake Up the Earth Festival. I will check with them. Usually they lend them. We actually did something at the Coolidge Corner Cinema. We put them up, and David Carl Olson, who was then the minister of the church, sang labor songs. People came up and sang songs that were appropriate in front of them, each mural. That was at the Coolidge Corner Theater back in about 2001 on May Day. And that was also in conjunction with Jobs for Justice.
Well, thank you. Are there any more images to see, Charlie, that we can?
No, they've gotten totally scrambled, unfortunately, now. So it's
okay.
Efforts, Charlie.
Charlie, thank you for that. I want to talk to you more about. I think I might have been able to just scroll up and down. They were in 2 emails that David sent to me, and they were all right there, very available. That was just great seeing those images, and I hope we can.
Well, maybe you can put them up on the website. I'll
yeah,
check.
and also intersperse
with Spontaneous.
With your
I
talk.
I think the whole mission of Spontaneous is that this work be seen.
Yeah. So, thank you again, Judith. And Matt and Yvonne, are you still with us? I bow, I put my hat to you. I raise my hat to you, my revolutionary hat. And to all of the rest of you, I want to end by just telling you about upcoming events. Next Sunday is Reverend Adrienne Barry Burton. Her topic is Mother's Day, Lavender, Frankincense, and Myrrh, the healing capacity of mothers. We have a special treat that just managed to line up. Her name is Joyce Anderson, and she's a marvelously talented songwriter from Maine, and she will be joining us. Instead of the one listed on the sheet here, it's Beatrice Green, who didn't feel able to do this virtual thing. But Joyce Anderson will be with us, and that's a terrific, worth hearing Joyce. The Sunday after that is May 17th, and Lee Schlenker is the head or activist in chief at Witness for Peace New England. He's a very eloquent young man. He will be talking about social movements in Latin America, especially focusing on Cuba, Colombia, and Honduras and Venezuela, places where he has taken delegations to visit. The Sunday after that is May 24th, and the subject is green burials. Thank you, Dave Lewitt, for this suggestion. We have a representative of Green Burials of Massachusetts who will talk to us about the environmentally friendly options for burial. And we'll be joined that day by David Dodson, who's my, again, Maine friend, who writes the funniest songs about death and dying that you've ever heard. May 17th, I'm sorry, May 24th. May 31st is going to be a certain guy named Dean Stevens, who's going to be sharing with you treasures from the archives of Community Church of Boston. I'm very much looking forward to that program. And finally, June 7th is a full Sunday of concert with Eliza Gilkison, who was going to be part of our 100th anniversary concert series, but it was postponed. But she's joining us on that Sunday for a full concert on June 7th. I'm very excited about that. She lives in Austin, Texas, and doesn't have to go out on tour to be with us. The possibilities of this Zoom thing are just great, even after we come together again, whenever that is, it doesn't matter. We will be together again, and don't forget that. This is a postponement, not a cancellation. And when we come back, we will have our act together to broadcast this more effectively and with more grace and more elegance and style to the planet. Right? Right. Good. I think that it's almost time, unless there's any final announcements. Charlie, could you unmute us all? That anything that anybody wants to say in conclusion before we say goodbye?
Yes, me.
Go ahead and
Go ahead.
Everybody,
That's
Judith?
Can
Okay.
can Matt and Yvonne do one more song?
Matt and Yvonne, one more song.
Yes.
I like that idea.
A song for May Day as well. It's by Ralph Chaplin, who wrote Solidarity Forever. And this is called The Commonwealth of Toil. In the gloom of mighty cities, mid the roar of whirling wheels, we are toiling on like chattel slaves of old. And our masters hope to keep us ever thus beneath their heels, and the coin of very lifeblood into gold. But we have a glowing dream of how fair the world will seem when each one can live their life secure and free. When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be. They would keep us cowed and beaten, cringing meekly at their feet. They would stand between each worker and his bread. Shall we yield our lives up to them for the bitter crust sweet? Shall we only hope for heaven when we're dead? But we have a glowing dream of how fair the world will seem when each one can live their life secure and free. When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be. They have laid our lives out for us to the other end of time. Shall we stagger on beneath their heavy load? Shall we let them live forever in their gilded halls of crime, with our children doomed to toil beneath their gold? But we have a glowing dream of how fair the world will seem when each one can live their life secure and free. When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be. When our cause is all triumphant and we claim our Mother Earth and the nightmare of the present fades away, we shall live with love and laughter, we who now are little worth, and will not regret the price we have to pay. Yes, we have a glowing dream of how fair the world will seem when each one can live their life secure and free. When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be.
Bravo.
Happy May Day.
Thank you. That was great.
And shall we declare the meeting adjourned?
Yes.
Sandra, great to see you. Charlie, thank you, everybody. Jim Casteris, Charlie and Karen, Ellen Bass, Josie, call-in user, all these people on the phone. There have been about, at the most, there were 32 people on the Zoom call. There were another 20 more on the YouTube live. So this is terrific. Ron, great to see you. Greg Horwich, very nice to meet you. Barry from Chicago. Kay, so nice to see you. Victor and Inez, what a treat. Great to see you.
Yes.
Jeremy, Dorothy. All right, and Sandra Harris. Saludos.
Somebody asked how to see the recording, and you go to the Community Church YouTube live channel.
It's called Community Church of Boston Official. And it is live there now, and we will turn it into, instead of a live stream, it'll be just a regular video. I'm really hoping, Judith, that we can take some of those images and with somebody who does video editing, make it a presentation of yours with some video, some images interspersed. That's above my pay grade, unfortunately, but maybe we can find the right person to do that.
That would be wonderful. And I think that maybe we ought to have in the fall some of the artists like David Victor and some of the other artists talking about the role of art in the struggles that we have ahead, because it plays a very important role. Art, music, and theater are very important to us in the struggles that we have.
Right.
Judith, what a wonderful idea, and maybe that could be a jumping off point for what we used to have for several years, which was called the Gallery of Social and Political Art, which was 3 or 4 political art displays every year.
Okay,
So, absolutely.
Dean, I'm going to mute everybody again. It's becoming chaos. And
Thank
unmute
you.
yourself.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Bye, Kay.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye, team. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Victor, so good to see you.
Bye, Craig and Jeremy.
Meeting at the building, soon be over, all over this world. All over this world, by God, oh, all over this world. Meeting at the building, soon be over, all over this world. Yeah. Here we go. The meeting is over. Bye, everybody.